Well, joining me here in Rothbury right now is the clinical psychologist Richard Marshall. Very good to have you with us. What sort of a person was Raoul Moat, and why did this happen?
Well, these are questions that people will be asking over the coming days, I'm sure. There is quite a typical stereotype, which unfortunately he matches, which is that he was very much into his image, a strong image of being a bodybuilder and a bouncer and so on. What we can glean, and it's easy sort of with hindsight and knowledge now, is that here's a man who was involved in domestic violence in his relationships, has had difficulties with caring for his children who were removed from his care. The typical presentation, which probably fits with a lot of other people, is that if you're building up a strong image, you're doing it for a reason. Now that reason is usually that there's some underlying insecurity that's being compensated for. Interestingly, the extent to which men are now building up an image has increased over the last few years. The use of steroids, bodybuilding and so on has become more and more important, partly fueled by the way men are portrayed in the media.
I wanted to pick up on something you said. We heard there from Martin Brunt about this dictaphone where he ranted, and he'd clearly been reading the newspapers and his private life was brought in. Comments made by his mother that were reported that he would be better off dead because of what he'd done. If he was reading those comments to somebody who's insecure, might that insecurity have started in childhood? And what would that do to his state of mind?
That's a good question. Certainly for anybody's mother to say they wish their son was dead must be horrific. And if that's the nature of and gist of the relationship that he's had with his mother over the years, one can only sort of imagine how crippling that is emotionally for an individual. What we find generally with a lot of people who've had adverse experiences in childhood is that it can go one of two ways. People can take it personally and feel dreadful. They might feel insecure in themselves but feel more depressed, lack confidence, and sort of emotionally sort of shrivel up a bit. However, there's another way which things can develop, which is that people can grow up with a bit of a chip on their shoulder. If the blame is externalized and people feel justified in being angry, then you can have a huge sort of fury building up over the years, justified in the individual's mind because they've externalized the blame.
Which is what we saw towards the police, isn't it, I suppose? Richard
Yes.
Marshall, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Consultant clinical psychologist, thank you very much indeed. So the picture being painted there of an insecure man who'd built up his own image through bodybuilding, who was prone to bouts of domestic violence, who was insecure perhaps about elements of his childhood, and who externalized his anger, directing it, as we saw, towards the police. So absolutely fascinating.